I'm Zooming from home this evening. While we are still happy to put your book orders out on the porch for contact-free pickup, if that's what you want, the store is now open for browsing Tuesday through Saturday. And I have to say, it's been a week and a half, and it is so great to have people back in the store, even if everybody's behind their masks. Before we can begin, a little bit of housekeeping. Michael Prowse, who you just heard his voice, is working the tech end of things to keep things going smoothly. So you may see his email name pop up. And this is being recorded. We put a link to past events on our website, lower right-hand corner. It usually takes a couple of days to get the new ones up. And for this Zoom event, we ask that you keep your video off and your audio mute. And we recommend that you use the speaker view rather than the gallery view on your screen, because with a big crowd that we're expecting, everybody gets to be the size of a postage stamp otherwise. And then we recommend you turn the chat option on, which is a button towards the bottom of your screen. And you can see the links to the books will be posted there, and that's where you add your questions and comments. The format is going to be very straightforward. I will do a brief introduction, and then our guests have the stage. And then toward the end, we'll open up to questions. As I said, you put them in the chat box. We're not doing raising hands and all those other juicy Zoom features. We're keeping it simple. But this evening, we are very happy to follow Saul Lodchuk's last week's event with another author who grew up here in the Upper Valley. It's fertile ground for writers as well as plants. Megan Baxter holds a BFA in poetry from Goddard College and an MFA in creative nonfiction from Vermont College of Fine Arts. She has taught writing in several different diverse venues, including workshops at public schools in South Carolina in underserved and at-risk communities. At Interlochen Arts Camp in Michigan, she was an instructor of high school level fiction and nonfiction, and she currently teaches writing at Colby Sawyer. Megan has won numerous national awards, including a Pushcart Prize, which is no mean feat. Her work has been listed in the Best American Essays of 2019, and recent publications included pieces in the Threepenny Review, the Florida Review, and Creative Nonfiction magazine. Megan's first book, The Coolest Monster, a collection of essays, was published in 2018, and I understand that she has another collection of essays in the works. But tonight we're celebrating the publication of her memoir, Farm Girl. And I was trying to write descriptions and realized that I was going to just quote author Sue Silverman, who says, quote, "This book explores entanglements with others, with the earth, with our expectations. Baxter is indeed a farm girl, but she is also a keen observer, a fine prose stylist, and a writer who marries the impulses of the head and the heart." And I couldn't have said it better. Here to talk with Megan about her book is Valerie Woodhouse. Valerie and her partner, Eli Hirsch, run Honeyfield Farm, a 35-acre family farm here in Norwich, known to many of us as the former Kildare Farm and Greenhouses. They grow 15 acres of certified organic vegetables to distribute to local and regional partners and for their farm stand and CSA customers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the evening over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a wonderful introduction. And I want to just say thank you to everyone who is here this evening. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names, teachers of mine from elementary school and middle school. It's wonderful to see you here in this space. I wish we could be in person, and maybe someday soon we will. Valerie and I are going to be in conversation throughout the evening. She is a wonderful supporter and fellow farm girl who is now working on land which is very close to the property that I called my sort of heart home for many years at Cedar Circle Farm in Thetford, Vermont. I had planned to read 2 sections of the book tonight, and after each section, Valerie and I will exchange some comments and questions between the two of us, after which point I will turn the floor over to you and your questions. So if anything comes up in the reading, please go ahead and add your question or comment into the chat box, and we'll try to get to it in the last part of our time together. I want to thank, first of all, my family, some of whom are here, for supporting me and encouraging me to continue writing at many stages in my life, from when I was first learning how to read and write as a child, to the decisions that led me to the place that I am, including leaving the education I was receiving at Hanover High to pursue a more specified arts education at Interlochen Arts Academy, to continuing my study of poetry at Goddard, and then returning to a master's program in Montpelier, Vermont. So thank you. I love you all, and I appreciate the support that I get from this community. I've been gone from the Upper Valley for about 5 years now, and I am so pleased to be back. It really feels like an embrace to be back in this space with everyone. I was going to begin, if you have a copy of the book, which some people do, they are on the way. COVID has made for some strange delays in the printing process, but there will be advanced copies available for sale at the Norwich Bookstore. I'm going to begin in chapter 6, which is towards the very beginning of the book. The memoir covers just one small year of my life, in 2008 to be exact, when I decided to leave my sort of traditional four-year college in Portland, Oregon, and return to the Upper Valley and farm full-time at Cedar Circle. At the same time that I was making these decisions, I was also going through a challenging split from a boyfriend I'd had for many years, who was in the throes of an opioid addiction. So in the process of deciding to leave that life behind and return to farming, I was also developing a sense of who I was as a young woman and as a person, separate from the identity that I had held previously in this relationship. So you might see some of these themes come up again in the section that I read tonight. The book moves back and forth between the real time of a season farming in Vermont and this story of my decision to leave school in Oregon and drive back across the country with everything I own, including my cat, in the car, and set up shop back in my family's home in Hanover and go to work at Cedar Circle. So here we go, chapter 6. After Jaden, and Jaden is the pseudonym for my boyfriend that I use in the text, some of the names here are changed out of respect for the people I'm writing about, but the majority of the names and place names are unchanged. After Jaden left, I spent my time at the farm with my head down in the rows, avoiding the crew's gaze, trying to ignore the ache in my chest and the stone in my stomach. It was easy to disappear into the fields. My body seemed to blend in like I was just part of the land. After months at the farm, my skin was tan and there were lines around my eyes and on my forehead. My fingernails held crescents of dark soil. My knees and elbows, although scrubbed, were dirty. That weekend, I planned to drive up to Cabot, Vermont, to attend my mother's family reunion. Every first Sunday of August for the past 40 years, they had gathered on the lawn of their dairy farm at the top of a long dirt road where, from the clustered picnic tables, we could look out to the purple folds of the Green Mountains. I'd never felt more connected to that side of my family than I did that morning after Jaden's disappearance, when I felt called in some way back to the land. I look forward to appearing at the family reunion in this new skin, this body of a farm girl. I wore my sweat-stained baseball cap, just as I remembered the old uncles wore, the brim's lips lined with salt. My blue jean shorts were slick, almost oily with wear. The toes of my boots shined, not from polish, but from work. As I unfolded out of the car with my siblings, I hoped that I would be welcome. My brother and sisters and I were always distinctly different from the other children and young people gathered there. Although only an hour's drive separated us, the contrast between our college town and their rural home was striking. Maybe they wouldn't look at me so strangely or for so long if I told them about the farm I worked on. I couldn't wait to respond to their question of, "What do you do?" with, "I'm a farmer." On that old hill, surrounded by the bones of my ancestors tucked into the cemetery near the heifer's pasture, I'd feel like I belonged. Year after year, my mother's family gathered and posed for a picture under the same old sugar maple. There was a wall in the old farmhouse where copies of these images stretched back into black and white. As kids, we'd scatter as soon as the photo was taken, the bursts of flash releasing us. We'd run out across the road to the family graveyard or into the barn to feed the calves or search the hayloft for nests of newborn kittens or out into the sugar bush to hunt wild blackberries. Only after a long while, or at the call of my mother's voice, would the four of us return to sit dutifully at the picnic table, resting our elbows on the sticky, checkered tablecloth. Always, some great uncle with deep-set eyes and weather-beaten skin manned a series of grills on the farmhouse porch, flipping frozen burger patties and hot dogs under a thunderhead of smoke. A great aunt, bent as a dried sunflower stalk, brought a cooler full of lobsters from her home in Maine. Another great uncle tended a huge pot of boiling water set above a wood fire where the lobsters were dipped and cooked until they were red as strawberries. Talking quietly to each other, they stacked up side dishes and desserts, quivering jello molds, cherry pies, chocolate cupcakes, macaroni, and potato salad thick with mayonnaise. My brother and sister and I scooped up and served ourselves huge plates of food, and then, sitting beneath the shade of the sugar maple, snapped open the shells of our lobsters and dipped them into cups of clarified butter. For a few minutes, we'd allow the aunts and uncles to meet us as if for the first time, the aunts and uncles pinching our cheeks and tousling our hair before dumping our plates into the garbage bins and fleeing again to the huge, sprawling farmland. But for the first time in decades, it was raining up on the hill during the reunion. Heavy clouds veiled the long view out into the mountains. Our family picture was taken under the eaves of the porch instead of beneath the sugar maple's shade. I'd never seen a photograph on the old wallpapered hall where the family was posed under the eaves. We packed in tightly for the shot while the rain rang on the metal roofing, shoulder to shoulder, the old great uncles leaning, the heavy-set aunts poking forward, aprons first. Then, quickly, we all broke apart. The old uncles went to the grills and the lobster pot, lighting cigars and cigarettes under the brim of their caps. The aunts tightened their apron strings and filtered back into the garage to prepare the picnic sides. I stood under the porch as the rain curtained the mountain view and wondered where I should go. My siblings had escaped into the dim, musty farmhouse to sit on hard chairs around the kitchen table. My mother and father gathered in the kitchen, helping the oldest aunt clarify butter. Because of the rain, the garage bays had been cleared out and the picnic tables, which usually lined the yard, were carried inside. Water dripped off the roof and flooded the oily concrete floor. Under the flickering fluorescent work lights, my aunts and female cousins served up their salads, mixing in mayo and mustard, slicing their pies into huge triangles. The men who weren't tending the grills or fire sat along one long end of a picnic table, talking about the weather. Their eyes were hidden under the lamplights. They spoke in the thick accent of northern Vermont, quick barks followed by drawn-out interior vowels. I couldn't tell if they noticed me. I grabbed a soda from the cooler, snapped open the mouth, and sat down, alone, to watch the rain. When the lobsters were reddened and cooling on their tray, the garage filled with bodies. The smell of cows, sweet hay, raw milk, cigars, WD-40, off-road diesel, butter, grill smoke, beer, wet leather. My brother and sister slipped in beside me on the picnic table bench with loaded platters and sweating cans of soda. They rolled their eyes and looked longingly at our car parked on the side of the dirt road. My mother sat near and began, as she always did, to introduce us again to her relatives. I clutched my hands together until they were pink, waiting for her to get to me and tell them that I was a farmer. When she finally mentioned that I worked at a farm, the men answered my mother's statement with a simple, "Yep." One old uncle asked how tall our corn was. I told him we'd already been harvesting it for a month, realizing too late that he meant feed corn instead of the sweet corn we were growing. He nodded and went back to crushing the shell of his lobster. I knew suddenly that they saw me not as an insider, but as an imposter, because I tended vegetables because I grew organically, and mostly, although they'd never say it, because I was a woman. My face flushed, and I pulled my hat brim low. Quickly, my brother and sisters and I emptied our plates and slipped them into the trash. After dessert and a few forced hugs, we zipped up our raincoats and rushed back to the car. The tires kicked up mud as we turned around and made our way back down the hill, past the graveyard where my grandmother and grandfather lay under their shared headstone. Wet dairy cows stood quietly behind the wooden fence. On the drive south along the bumpy roads, my brother and sisters fell asleep, resting their heads against each other and the windows. I looked out at the road, at the rain-washed farmhouses and decaying barns, at hayfields and flower gardens, yards both tidy and cluttered. I don't think I'm the sort of farmer they're used to, I said to no one in particular. My mother asked me about my college classes, and I knew what she was really saying was stay in school. She didn't want me to be a farmer. After all, she'd chosen to move off that hill. I listed my courses off to her flatly. What was I wondered. I stood somewhere between two identities, the girl in pearls who my mother was proud of, the girl who was going back to college, back to the boy she'd once loved, and this other girl, this dirty farm girl, dressed as I was dressed in the car in clothing that smelled like sweat and soil. I tried to push the thought of leaving to the very edge of my consciousness. If I even brushed against the idea, my heart sank, waterlogged. There was no room to move, to work, to breathe with a heart like that. But I knew, just as I knew that the days were getting shorter, that the grasses were yellowing, that the melons were ripening and the winter squash beginning to sweat sugar through their skins, that I'd have to go. Driving home, we passed geese, picking feed out of the cut hayfields, and I thought of their winged migration down mountains and river guideways and wondered if that move hurt or if it was something lighter in their breasts, something sweet. All right, Valerie, I know you had some questions related to this particular section. We were talking about it the other day at Honeyfield.
Yeah, Megan, this section really resonated with me. I was getting so nervous on your car ride there, where you were so hopeful and sharing this identity that had become so important to you with your family, with these agricultural roots. And I just wondered, like, has well, one, I mean, you uh I guess I'm just curious if you could like share why that experience stuck with you and if this has resurfaced in your life, even as you've been like a seasoned farmer with over 15 years of experience.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that sticks with me um, is there's some friction at that moment in my life where I both want to embrace and be part of that agricultural history. My mother's family has farmed that land in Cabot for hundreds of years. And I think it's such a special thing to be able to go up to a small family graveyard and be surrounded very literally by the bones of your whole family. But at the same point, being part of a tradition isn't copying it or inhabiting it fully. I was sort of breaking off and making my own story at this point. I wasn't deciding to move to the Northeast Kingdom and to pursue dairy in particular in my farming. So I think it was a chance for me to, and in the book it comes off more maybe confrontational or more of a contrast than I feel now. But at the time it did feel a little bit like a rejection of what I was doing. I think in context to the experiences I've had since the time of the book, I realized that it is really more about me being from a tradition and then being able to establish my own path forward from that. But the other thing that we were mentioning and you're hinting at in your question is the challenge that women in particular have in agriculture. So it has been challenging for me to sort of portray myself as somebody with authority. I will read the next section is about being at the farmer's market, and something I was always asked when I was there was, are you the farmer? Can I speak to the farmer? Even when I was a production manager in charge of all of the vegetable farming at a 45-acre farm. And not just being not recognized, but also not being a novelty. I think more and more, especially in this area, there is a decades long tradition of strong women farm owners and co-owners. And I'm happy to be part of that now. But it is something that, especially as a younger woman, I really had to advocate for my authority to present. I presented at a couple of big farming conferences of New England, and I look back and I think, oh my gosh, I was so brave to stand up in front of all of these experts and tell them how to grow their strawberries at 25 as this young girl. But being part of the community isn't entirely about my identification as a woman. I write in the book about how I do feel this deep connection to the growing cycle, which I feel a particular strength in as being a woman. I don't know if that's something that you experience too, especially this time of year with everything blooming and the whole cycle of seeing something from a seed all the way into a glorious greenhouse.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And yeah, I think it's something that probably all of us has experienced, and you and I shared just sort of like the, not with everyone, but the repeated experience of someone coming up and asking me something, asking like, oh, where's Eli? I need to speak to the farmer. And it's like, well, I'm actually the farmer too.
Yeah.
But just that like inherent from, again, not from everyone, but just that sort of assumption that we might not know what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and that feeling of like, oh, I have to prove myself to show that I'm like as dedicated or as strong or as hardworking or
Right.
whatever. And how that has luckily, it sounds like for both of us, fizzled a little with, as we get older and things like that. But
Yeah.
yeah. Did I was, I mean, I guess I'm curious if you, I know that the book was set at that time. And so during that time, like, was being recognized as the farmer, since that had become such a special identity to you and something that you were turning towards and turning your focus towards, was that something you were looking back to be reflected and affirmed, or was that something that you were just able to, that you were toying with and playing with and evolving into
I
more?
think the second, I think it was something I was evolving into. And at that time I was on the field crew. I was just out and hoeing and weeding and picking vegetables. So I think what it was mostly about for me at that time was identifying with that crew, like with, I think I might use the word tribe or group or community, but the people that I worked with at that time were dear to me in this really particular way, sort of between family and childhood friends and kind of a mirror image of yourself. And we were all at a stage at that point in our lives, I think, and I'm sure they can speak for themselves too, but we were kind of reinventing ourselves and being at the farm and having this job that is so nuanced and so challenging in every possible way, really allowed us to take on these personas and these roles that were really exciting to us at the time. So for me, calling myself a farmer or farm girl was also about solidarity. It was about saying I was part of this thing with other people that I really loved.
Hmm. Yeah, farm crews, like, especially because they change every year. It's like
Mm-hmm.
each year is this special family
Mm-hmm.
And you have some pillars that keep moving through season to season, but those that just come for, part of a season, and it's like they're their own special chapters, each one.
Definitely. And at the time of the book, I know Eli had this experience when he was farming, that everyone was all sort of the same age, and the farm was also young at that point. And I won't say it was the Wild West, but there was a lot of room for experimentation and trying new things. And we were all learning together too. And there was something so powerful about like seeing the improvements we were making in the soil and in the product year to year, season to season, and then growing up together as well. So the folks who are in this book, I started at the farm when I was 15, and many of them were in their late teenage years, early 20s. And we sort of moved through that period together. And many of us stuck around for 10, 15 years, and some folks are still there working at Cedar Circle.
Yeah.
Well, should I read my next section?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have chosen the next section to read here because it's actually about going to the Norwich Farmers Market. That was one of my favorite roles at the farm, setting up the market, selecting the product and the produce to bring there, and interacting with customers. It was one of the first sort of specialized jobs that I had at the farm, and I really enjoyed being sort of the face of everything that we were doing at Cedar Circle at the time. So this section in Farm Girl directly follows the one that I just read about returning from my mother's family reunion in Vermont, and it's set in early May at the Norwich Farmers Market, which we can all picture, I think, many of us, because it just opened last weekend. On Saturday mornings, it was my job to leave the farm and set up a booth at the farmers market in a town downriver. The market starts the last weekend in May, just as the world is opening to green and heat. It is a task that I've earned, like seeding and harvesting asparagus, and I feel proud to be asked to perform it. I enjoy being the face of the crew, the only one of us who gets to share what we grow directly with a customer. I am the farmer in their eyes. It surprises people to see a young woman in this role, and if they doubt me, I draw them back in with my stories. I can smile all day and describe our products like a seed catalog. Words are something I cultivate like plants. They roll and grow as lush as squash vines on my tongue. It's my stories as well as the displays of the vegetables that make people stay and shop. I learn these secrets, like I learn how to start a seed or pick a berry. I've been going to market for the farm for the past few summers, and I know that the best sales are early in the year when everyone in town grows excited to be outside again, eating fresh pastries out of brown bags and filling wicker baskets with bright pink radishes and bunches of thin local asparagus. It's a commerce of hope. The market ground sits on a flat yard between a local hardware store and a hayfield, which in early spring is just beginning to flush green. Between the store and the yard, young apple trees drop blankets of pink petals under their shaded skirts. The hayfield across the road is small and neatly mowed. It comes to an end up against a bank of white pine and maples as the land climbs into gentle hills. Between cuttings, the farmer parks his blue and white New Holland tractor at the edge of the grass, and it casts shadows like a sundial. When business is slow or the day drags cold and rainy, I stare out at the field and imagine myself in the grass, on my hands and knees, weeding. I must set the tent up before the opening bell at 8 a.m. So Saturdays start early, even earlier than other farm mornings. I bike to Cedar Circle before there is much light in the sky. Not even Ichi, the cat, is awake. He's still curled in some secret place beneath the barn. The fields lie still, like they too are sleeping. Night's odd colorlessness rests strange upon the plants. They grow and breathe without us tending them in these long intervals of darkness. I feel almost out of place walking across the road to the shop. Maybe I'm waking them up too early. I tiptoe, but there's no way to start the key to the big market van without making a sound. I roar the van's engine to life, its diesel shaking the stillness from the dawn. Carefully, I back it up to the double barn doors, and with the help of Robert, who comes up from the staff parking lot, still lacing on his boots, we load crates of vegetables onto the van's shelves. Coins rattle in the metal cash box as I carry it across the driveway. The market is an exchange where the weight of our soil and water and toil and sweat comes back locked in the hard metal cash box. But the idea doesn't cheapen the day. There are bellies to feed, beautiful dinners to be hosted. All the ingredients of these meals are packed and washed and stacked high in the back of the market van. Robert and I fill water bottles and make ourselves tea in the cafe, the steam flushing our cheeks in the bite of dawn. We pull the van behind the greenhouses and grab the flowers I set aside the day before. The tea steeps darkly in our mugs as Robert hangs the baskets on the brackets above the crates of vegetables, and I line the flats of plants on the shelves welded to the body of the van. We settle into our seats and reach for our cups, taking a look behind my shoulder at the lock stacks of crates and the swaying, hanging flower baskets, bright even in the morning's dim light. Before turning onto the main road, I run one last checklist through my head and quickly tally up how much money we can make if we sell all of our cargo. Soon I'll be pressing what I've grown into the palms of customers, handing off the fruits of our labor. Downriver, the sun rises gently. The fog spreads pink to golden at the eastern edge of the hills, and the water reflects sky and field between serpentine banks. Halfway to the market, the river bends as the road climbs, and across the waters in New Hampshire, Dartmouth's stand of ancient white pines lifts in a solid vertical wall of green. Dawn casts clean shadows off the trees like the sun through a canyon. In the back of the van, the crates rock and creak, hanging baskets sway, dusting the flowers with a neon confetti of petals. My prayers on a market morning are for empty crates, thick stacks of bills in the cash box, and big crowds, their hands dancing over the displays hungrily. Robert and I sell asparagus, spinach, radishes, Swiss chard, arugula, lettuce, scallion, salad mix, bok choy flowers, and hanging baskets. The vegetables are young and tender, still softly spring-like. I handle them delicately because they will easily bruise or wilt. When we arrive, passing the van through an aisle of apple trees, I first cast out the tablecloths and smooth them over the tables, then stack our wooden display shelves. Robert carries over the crates of produce while I arrange each crop and hook a handwritten price sign beside it. We loop hanging baskets on the metal frame of the tent and set flats of vegetable starts and flowers out like small gardens growing from the shade of our canopy onto the market ground's fresh wood mulched aisle. When the display is complete, I step back into the walkway and look at it, ambling by like a customer might. I duck in to rotate a bunch of radishes and straighten a price tag, getting everything just right, settled in the perfect place between order and casual messiness. Too nice and people will take pictures but not buy anything. Too sloppy and they won't stop to look. By the time the manager rings his brass bell declaring the market open for business, Robert and I stand behind the tables with cedar circle aprons and baseball caps on, sipping our tea and splinting off soft flakes of fresh croissants from the vendor across the lawn. At lunch, we slip away one at a time to purchase food from the other tents. I always buy an orzo salad made with chopped herbs and local goat cheese from a Greek family. Robert buys meat pies from a British baker and glass quarts of raw milk from a couple of old sisters who work a dairy farm along the river. The milk is oyster white and thick. He has to shake the glass to break up the ring of cream in its throat. While one of us sits on the red cooler eating our market lunch in the shade of the tent, the other stands and works. I watch the back of Robert's legs and his hands gesturing as he describes the peppery bite of arugula or the wet crunch of spring radishes. The sun rises and rotates over our shoulders. I plant my feet firmly on the market lawn, my boots gripping the wet grass and wood chips, my hands resting on the hips of my blue jeans, watching with pride as our display shrinks, vegetable by vegetable, bunch by bunch, until there is more tablecloth and apple crate showing than greenery. Here, the circle completes itself. What we grow leaves us.
Well, Megan, this was my favorite thing to read before our first market at Norwich Farmers Market last week. It was like getting a little sneak preview. I was like, wow, that's intense that it used to start at 8 a.m.
It doesn't start at 8 a.m.? Oh my gosh. Okay,
No,
well,
now it's 9.
a casual 9 o'clock. That's nice.
Yeah. But there were some details that I loved in this. I was like, wow, I didn't know it was universal to do the whole like calculating what, if you sold your whole bounty, which who knows if that's going to happen or not. I didn't realize that was a universal farmer thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think this is in the book. We had this joke going around about sort of music that people don't assume that farmers are listening to. But on the way to market at that time, the person who was going with me and I would listen to MIA's All I Want to Do Is Take Their Money. That was like our like theme song, just to get us really focused for the day. I know we were like watering to Eminem in the greenhouse the other day as our inspiration. But yeah, being in a space that's so compact with your product, I think is a really unique experience for somebody in a business. And what people might not realize, if anybody's here who hasn't had the pleasure of going to a farmer's market, is that it's a ton of work. It is a lot of labor to load everything up into a van, take it out, set it up, and then put it all back in the crates, back in the van, bring it back to the farm and unpack it. So your hope for your own sake is that everything is sold there. It's a good motivator.
Totally.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know that something we were looking the most forward to at the market was getting to trade, doing the trading and going around and getting your lunch at different places, and just like the community of the market, and how in reality you're all there to compete with each other, right? Like there's a bunch of other farms. We saw Cedar Circle just down the road from us. But it doesn't feel like that. It's like everybody's cheering for each other at the same time.
Yeah, and it becomes its own little story. My sister Hannah, who's in the book, came to the market to visit Eli and get some of your hot sauce, and she texted me that a woman who does cheese, who had set up next to us for years, and this woman was married the week of Tropical Storm Irene in a flooded farm pasture. And we got to meet her baby when it was just a few days old at the market. It was so tiny. And now her kids are all there and they're all grown up. And it's just amazing to see the kind of the whole continuality of that community of growers come together.
Yeah. And so my next question is somewhat related to this, but also just related to the book as a whole. Like, I'm just in awe of your level of perception and the details and descriptions, but also just, I mean, I learn from you every time you're at the farm and think of you as like a wealth of farm wisdom. But I hadn't like realized I was also going to get to learn from you in the book about farming things. And I am just curious if you could like tell us a little bit more about like the way your brain works when you're on the farm, when you're scanning things. You're not just taking in the, you know, beauty and what's going on. You're like making calculations, you're feeling, touching things, feeling things, and coming to conclusions about like what you need to do next. And I don't know, like, where did that come from? Is that, resources of like learning from other farmers? Is that from other books you've read? Or like,
Yeah,
how do I learn how to think that way?
Yeah, it's a combination of all those things. It's experience, very lived experience, and I'm a really sensory person. I think that comes across in the book as well. And I sometimes will catch myself doing things where I'm like, man, that's hippie. Why am I doing this hippie thing, like grabbing a bunch of soil? And I realize intuitively that like in the tomato greenhouses, when I was on Tuesday, had Andy put the sides down because we want to get the soil temp up to about 65 degrees before the tomatoes go in. So by, getting a bunch of soil in my hand, I'm trying to see if it's warm, if it's warming up. If it's cold to the touch, the tomatoes are not going to do anything. So much about growing organically is about health. And we've talked about this as people and as bodies as well. Growing the strongest, healthiest plants allows them to sustain and overgrow or overcome the stress of disease and weather and watering and insects. So what I often see when I'm scanning a greenhouse is I'm looking for stress or indications of stress in the plants. I called this in the book my spidey senses. And I think a lot of it is kind of a deep understanding of time as well. When I was managing the farm, it occurred to me that being an astute manager of people and also of plants was being able to see in that fourth dimension, being able to see in time. So beginning a task a month before that, the thing that everyone thinks is the task, flipping the greenhouse, begins with seeding the first spring crops and so on. In an awareness of the weather, I'm particularly keyed into the weather, the little micro climate of the valley that you guys farm in, and can do spooky things like it's going to rain in 5 minutes, because I've been there and I know how the wind moves through that area. But I've always been someone who's drawn to the natural world, and I don't know if it's something deeper, something spiritual, or really just a product of observation and reverence. But I do feel, and I can say this honestly, that the energy of a field of growing things, or the breath of a greenhouse when you walk into it, is charged with so many wonderful positive things that I really appreciate the chance to be able to be in that space and kind of be part of that cycle. It's a really powerful thing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And like, when I don't remember which section of the book it was, but when you wrote out the prayers and gratitude that you were saying to, I think it was like the tomatoes or something, as you were composting them, I was just like, this is magical.
Yeah,
this
tomatoes.
is like a very magical relationship.
Yeah. And now I get to have a relationship with your tomatoes.
No, I love it.
There are certain crops that have a different life cycle than the regular, lettuce mix or carrot bunches. And tomatoes are one of those that go in the hoop house first thing in the spring and produce and are touched and pruned and clipped and harvested by you all the way until October. So you have this longer connection to them. I felt the same way about our blueberries, which were exactly the same age as I was. So when I was pruning them, I was like kind of really seeing in a visual way well, now they're 35, but at the time they were a little bit younger, what that looked like in a plant. So I think we have some questions. Did we get some questions, Lisa? Thank you so much for chatting with me, Valerie.
Yeah, of course.
This has been fascinating. The first question is about agricultural technology, like satellite weather forecasts or whatever. Does that technology enhance or detract from the sensory experience of farming?
Right. This is like the Bob Dylan quote, you don't need the weatherman to know which way the wind blows. I love, which is a great quote, but I have Weather Underground on my phone and I look at it obsessively. Radar is incredibly helpful, especially for like staff and crew safety around big storms, thunderstorms in particular. Weather technology also helps us track trends. And I think an interesting thing to observe is the climate has changed in the last 15 years that I've been farming here. So you can look at historic highs and lows and see that shift. So it's a combination of both things, certainly. I'm no longer managing a big farm. So those kind of nerve-wracking nights where you're sleeping in a sleeping bag in your greenhouse by the propane heater, I don't have that experience anymore, although I have been there. You're not praying for rain in whatever way you can. But I do think it's both things. Technology is super helpful. Even a simple thing like a temperature alarm in a greenhouse to let you know when it's dipped below into a danger zone for that space is a really helpful thing. And we have our phones all the time, so I think it saves farmers a lot of getting out there in the middle of the night and checking a temperature gauge, which is in the ground.
So along the same lines of the sensory writing, your writing is very lyrical and textural. And I'm wondering about your choice of doing personal essays as opposed to fiction or poetry, or what led you to the form that you're using?
Yeah. Well, I studied poetry at Interlochen and then at Goddard. And after Goddard, I went to Breadloaf Writing Conference in the poetry workshop for their August session. And our author Zay, who's a wonderful poet from the Southwest, was my workshop teacher. And he said, I really like what you're doing. And don't take this the wrong way, but I don't think you're writing poetry. And what I had submitted for that workshop were small essays. So I began working more in prose, but with a lot of lyrical language. And I am currently working on fiction. All of my projects are fiction, long form fiction. I do, as you mentioned, have another book of essays that's coming out next year from Mad Creek Books as part of their 21st essay series. It's sort of kind of art essays is what I call them. They're experimental in a lot of ways, but I love the sound of language. My mother is a professional musician, and I was raised with music and musicality, so I think my ear is really attuned to sound as well.
That's interesting. That makes sense. Well, then I have another question about these very personal essays, and that is that they are very personal. And my question is, did you clear them even with pseudonyms? Did you clear them with some of the people you write about, or did you do some self-censoring? How did it work to be so forthcoming?
I have a strange but very helpful personality trait in which I am very private as a person, but I have absolutely no problem writing about myself in really telling ways. So in this book, I did censor and change certain names based on my kind of my current relationship with that person. I wouldn't say that I altered things. I definitely chose to omit certain things, which is, what separates memoir from just a journal of our everyday lives. And I didn't clear it with my parents. They're here somewhere in Zoom world, or my siblings. But I felt as if I represented them in a way that they would be moderately comfortable with. It's been really charming to see, especially my sisters read this book and find themselves in it and call me out on little details that I had gotten wrong, because they're in the story. And memoir is fascinating in that it's just one perspective, but we live in family groups and communities. And then the character Jaden is a person I'm not in a lot of contact with. He is alive and well and teaching, and a father, and very happy and healthy now, and has reached out to me since the publication of the book, and I've sent him a copy of it. We always, at the basis of our relationship, was a love of writing, and I think that that's still there, and he has expressed that he is proud of me for continuing to pursue the written word. So that means a lot to me. And when I was writing about our relationship, or some of the things that I was witness to in his life, I really wanted to make sure that I was portraying it as my experience, not bringing or trying to put words in his mouth or tell his story in particular.
And so the next question actually is a great follow-up to what you just said, and that was, did you discover something about yourself in this process of writing and editing a memoir that you didn't know before you dove in?
Oh man. I'll start with a light one. I apparently have moments of intense revelation almost every time I eat pancakes. There are 3 scenes that remain in the book in which I eat pancakes with maple syrup on them and have this like life-changing epiphany. There were 3 other instances in the book. That would be 6 pancake eating epiphanies that I edited out because I realized in the read through, I was like, oh my gosh, every time I sit down to eat pancakes, this amazing thing happens. So that's on the lighter side. I do love pancakes. My father makes the best pancakes. My mother's family runs a big sugar bush in the Northeast Kingdom. So I've been spoiled with good syrup my whole life. And I eat pancakes like a Vermonter does. Like the pancake is just the sponge for the maple syrup. But on another side, I guess what I learned about myself was just how young I was at the time that this stuff was happening. And it's an interesting time in your life where, I was 21, 22, and I felt so old. I felt so grown up and established but also very alone. It comes across in the book. And writing this, I wanted to go back, especially as a teacher and someone who loves to work as a mentor for young people, and just like hug this kid and be like, no, you're not old. You're 22. You have so much life ahead of you. You can reach out to people. You can ask for help. So I had this kind of shift in my relationship with my younger self, if that makes sense, in writing the book. And I think, this book was just a year, but this kind of journey or this saga about trying to find an identity, trying to find a community that I felt accepted by is sort of an ongoing theme in a lot of my work and also in my personal life. So this sense of not really finding a place that I fit in, nerdy kid, weird kid, is something that I see again and again, and especially in my nonfiction.
So if you learn that in your reading, is there something that you envision you wanted the reader to learn or take away?
Well, I hope that this book is a joyful one for people when they read it. I think there's so much satisfaction in making a decision that betters your life, even if it's just at that one, small year or two of your life. So I hope that it's a pleasant reading experience and maybe allows someone to feel more powerful in their choice that they're making. I also wanted people to come away from it with an understanding of the work that goes into growing food organically and locally, and from the practicalities of the labor to what it's like to work in the cold or the rain or the heat, not just for appreciation, but in some ways inspiration. I think it's really important that we understand where our food comes from and get a chance to maybe go out and start our own gardens and grow our own food too.
Valerie, do you have other questions that you want to pose to Megan? You need to unmute.
All right, let me pull back up my notes. Well, my next question was what you just said was, what was the thing you wish you could have most shared with that version of yourself? But do you feel like you've already answered that?
Yeah, and also that you don't have to be one thing. I think this is a product of being young too, that you think that there's this just binary, and it's just you're this or you're this. I have the great pleasure right now in my life from from the farm with dirty hands, going home, showering, putting on my slick blazer and going to teach, and I'm completely comfortable moving between those two roles. And at that time I was so fixed on being one thing or the other. So that's something I would tell my younger self, is that, you don't have to make it this one decision that will choose who you are for the rest of your life.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems like they enhance each other in
Yeah,
a
I
way.
think they do. And I'm just so happy that I've been able to fit those two things together. In the book, returning to farming for me, I saw at that time as a departure from my artistic pursuits. I just couldn't find a way to connect those two things. But I'm pleased now that I have been able to see my life a little bit more holistically.
Mhm.
Yes, the threads, as you get a little older, they weave
Yeah.
together, and they have more strength for doing that.
Yes, exactly.
So I think, do you have any last things you want to share? Or are we ready to wrap it up?
No, I want to thank everybody, and again, if you want to get a copy of the book, you can reserve it at the Norwich Bookstore. You can go in person and say hi to them and reserve it. I should have some more copies to sign coming up in the next week or so, and I am just so happy to see so many people here. Do we have any more questions, Lisa?
Nothing is sitting here. We did put uh, the link to the book in the chat, to if you want to just go directly to the website, but we're happy to take your calls. I want to thank you both for taking an hour out of this busy season, for both of you in your own ways, and also everybody who joined us. And I hope you can join us all for another event. We've got lots of authors lined up over the next few weeks and months, and come visit us in the store. So we appreciate you writing the book and joining us, and everybody coming to listen, and your questions, Valerie. And I think we can close it for tonight. So thank you very much. Yes, indeed.